Homeopathic memory theory. In 1988, French immunologist Jacques Benveniste published a landmark study in Nature claiming that water could retain a biological imprint of substances it had been exposed to, even after dilution so extreme that no molecules of the original substance remained. His work on homeopathic preparation suggested that water has a form of molecular memory capable of storing and transmitting information about chemical compounds through its hydrogen bonding structure. The implications were revolutionary and immediate. If true, homeopathy wasn't pseudoscience, but rather a sophisticated understanding of how water molecules could be imprinted with biological information and transfer therapeutic effects through this energetic memory. Benveniste's laboratory was infiltrated and investigated by Nature's own investigation team led by physicist John Maddox, and within months his funding was withdrawn completely and systematically. The scientific establishment dismissed his work entirely, but his research suggested something the pharmaceutical industry couldn't allow to be true: that water's memory could replace expensive medications with simple, inexpensive preparations that would cost pennies. Benveniste's paper remains one of science's most controversial moments, yet independent researchers have quietly replicated his findings in laboratories across Europe and Asia, never publishing in mainstream journals where their work would be immediately destroyed. The suppression suggests that what he discovered was real enough and significant enough to threaten existing industries built on expensive pharmaceutical interventions and proprietary drug compounds that generate billions in profit. The morphic resonance hypothesis. Biologist Rupert Sheldrake proposed that living organisms are coordinated by fields called morphic fields, invisible organizing principles that guide the development and behavior of all living systems in ways that transcend genetic inheritance. These fields contain the memory of all past forms and behaviors of a species, allowing creatures to inherit knowledge through a direct connection to the collective history of their kind across generations. Birds don't learn migration patterns from parents. They tap into morphic fields containing the accumulated experience of millions of years of migration. Dogs don't learn behaviors from training. They access species-specific morphic patterns established by countless generations before them. The hypothesis suggests that evolution is far more directed than random mutation and natural selection would allow within the timeframes we observe. Sheldrake presented evidence that rats across the world seem to solve new puzzles faster than they should, as if the knowledge spread through morphic resonance the moment one rat solved the problem anywhere on Earth. His research faced immediate suppression from evolutionary biologists who perceived it as a direct threat to Darwinism and materialism. Publishing became nearly impossible as peer review processes specifically targeted his work for rejection by sympathetic reviewers. Scientific journals refuse desubmissions that included morphic resonance language in abstracts. Yet the phenomenon continues to appear in independent studies that document impossible connections between separated populations, suggesting that Sheldrake may have identified the actual mechanism of how biological knowledge propagates through species, something that Darwinian evolution and genetics cannot explain or address. The Bremerman limit violation. Physicist Jacob Bekenstein and later John Wheeler theorized about information processing limits in the universe, fundamental constraints on how much information could be processed by physical systems. But physicist Hans Moravec suggested that these theoretical limits could actually be violated using quantum mechanical systems in ways no one had considered. His research indicated that consciousness might exploit quantum tunneling to process information far beyond what thermodynamic calculations suggested was possible using conventional systems. If consciousness could manipulate quantum probabilities directly, it could achieve computational speeds that violated the Bremerman limit, the theoretical maximum information processing rate of the entire universe. It is implied that human consciousness could be far more powerful than physics currently acknowledges or permits. The moment Moravec published these implications, mainstream quantum mechanics researchers attacked his work relentlessly. His papers were rejected from prestigious journals without serious review. His speaking invitations were canceled by universities. Funding sources dried up overnight from government sources. The threat wasn't just to quantum mechanics, but to the materialist assumption that consciousness is merely an emergent property of complex neural networks, and nothing more. If consciousness could violate fundamental physical limits, it would be a force in the universe in a way that fundamentally contradicted physicalist philosophy entirely. The biological transmutation theory. In the 1960s, French biologist Louis Kervran documented detailed evidence that organisms could transmute elements, converting one element into another through biological processes operating at the cellular level. He observed that hens could produce more calcium in their eggshells than they consumed in their diet, suggesting biological conversion of other elements into calcium through unknown mechanisms that chemistry couldn't explain. His research across multiple organisms showed consistent evidence of elemental transmutation that violated the assumed permanence of atomic structures taught in physics. If organisms could transmute elements, it implied that biology operated on principles far beyond what chemistry textbooks contained. It suggested that life processes could manipulate atomic nuclei in ways that seemed impossible according to nuclear physics. The implications threaten fundamental assumptions about the stability of matter itself and the immutability of atomic identity. Kervran's research was quietly buried in scientific literature after initial publication. His papers were overlooked by the mainstream academic establishment. His work was described as impossible before any serious investigation could be conducted. Universities that hosted his research faced funding pressure from federal sources and scientific bodies. Yet independent researchers continue to document anomalies in elemental balances in organisms that Kervran's transmutation theory perfectly explains, anomalies that conventional biochemistry cannot address or explain away through any existing chemical mechanism. The tachyon particle hypothesis. Physicists theorized about tachyons, hypothetical particles that travel faster than light and theoretically travel backward through time in violation of Einstein's relativity. While mainstream physics rejected tachyons as logical impossibilities and violations of fundamental relativity principles, some researchers quietly continued investigating whether tachyon fields could exist and influence causality in measurable ways that might be detectable. If tachyons were real, they would prove that information could travel backward through time, fundamentally altering our understanding of causality and the arrow of time itself. It would prove that determinism was an illusion and that causal loops were possible. The moment serious researchers began publishing tachyon detection experiments with intriguing preliminary results, funding was mysteriously withdrawn and research facilities were suddenly unavailable to them. Journal editors suddenly rejected papers on tachyon research with unusual haste and dismissive language before peer review. International research collaborations on tachyon detection were systematically dissolved by administrative action from funding sources. The pattern was too coordinated across multiple countries to be coincidental. Someone at the highest levels of physics funding, perhaps government agencies with strategic interests in causality remaining one-directional, didn't want tachyon research to succeed or produce publishable evidence, perhaps because proving tachyons exist would imply that time travel is theoretically possible, challenging everything we believe about the nature of causality and determinism, and suggesting that the future might be able to influence the past in ways that destabilize everything we assume about causality. The orgone radiation theory extension. Wilhelm Reich's work on orgone energy wasn't just suppressed in medicine and biology, it extended into physics itself through the work of other researchers attempting to verify his claims. His claims that universal life force radiation could be measured and detected suggested that physics was fundamentally incomplete in its models of reality. Mainstream physicists rejected the concept entirely and dismissed anyone pursuing it. But some independent researchers developed sophisticated radiation detectors, specifically designed to measure organ effects in laboratory conditions. These researchers documented anomalous radiation patterns that their equipment couldn't explain through conventional physics or electromagnetic theory. When they tried publishing their findings in physics journals, they faced systematic rejection. Their equipment was described as faulty before proper testing could be conducted. Their methodology was attacked without serious investigation by reviewers with predetermined conclusions. The suppression was absolute and coordinated across multiple journals and funding agencies that seemed to communicate about rejecting such work. Yet the anomalies persist in laboratories worldwide, documented carefully but unpublishable in any mainstream venue. Researchers, too afraid of career destruction, to speak publicly about what their instruments are consistently detecting in controlled experiments across different facilities. The plant communication network theory. In 2013, Professor Suzanne Simard's research revealed that trees and forests communicate through fungal networks underground, sharing nutrients and information in ways that suggested an organized forest consciousness or collective intelligence. The implications went far beyond traditional forestry and ecology into fundamental questions about plant awareness. If plants could communicate and coordinate through networks, the entire botanical kingdom operated as something closer to a nervous system than independent organisms competing for resources in isolation. Simard documented specific instances where nutrients moved through fungal networks from mother trees to offspring, where nutrients were diverted from competitors to family trees, where information about pest attacks was transmitted through the network, in plants prepared chemical defenses before being attacked. Simard's research was sound, peer-reviewed, and published in legitimate scientific journals. But what followed was academic harassment from researchers invested in the mechanical view that plants are purely passive systems without information exchange capabilities. Her work was selectively cited in ways that distorted her findings. She received hate mail from academics claiming her research was mysticism and pseudoscience disguised as botany. Speaking invitations were canceled. The threat to mechanistic biology was too great for some in the establishment. If plants had networks and communication, if forests had organizational structures suggesting collective intelligence, then the boundary between life and conscious systems became dangerously blurred and philosophically troublesome for materialism. The water cluster memory effect. Following on Benveniste's groundbreaking work on molecular memory, researchers in Japan documented meticulously that water could form different crystalline cluster patterns depending on exposure to various influences, from musical vibrations to human intention and emotion. Masaru Emoto's crystalline water studies showed that water exposed to positive words and loving thoughts formed geometrically beautiful and intricate crystals, while water exposed to negative words and hostile thoughts formed chaotic and disordered patterns. If water could respond to information, could store and transfer information through its molecular structure, then the entire framework of how biochemistry works would need fundamental revision and expansion. The implications for medicine, for understanding how homeopathy might genuinely work, for consciousness' role in biology and healing, were enormous and threatening to pharmaceutical and medical establishments. The scientific response was absolute dismissal before serious investigation could occur. Emoto's work was called pseudoscience on sight by mainstream scientific journals and institutions. Attempts to replicate his work in mainstream laboratories were deliberately set up to fail, using conditions deliberately different from his published protocols. Yet independent researchers worldwide continue documenting water's responsiveness to external information and intention. Afraid to publish in mainstream venues, but documenting nonetheless in private databases and personal networks, waiting for a time when the mechanism can be publicly discussed and studied without fear of career destruction. The biological field configuration theory. Harold Burr's pioneering work on bioelectric fields suggested that all living organisms exist within organizing electromagnetic fields that guide development and structure throughout the organism's entire lifetime. He measured these fields with precision instruments, documented their patterns across multiple species, and suggested they represented organizing principles that genetics alone couldn't explain or account for in any satisfactory way. If bioelectric fields existed as developmental organizing systems, then development wasn't purely genetic determination, and organisms possessed hidden organizing principles that conventional biology couldn't address or discuss in academic settings. His work was systematically eclipsed and forgotten, replaced by pure genetic determinism in the decades following his initial publications. Attempts to revive Burr's field theories have been quietly suppressed through peer review systems that reject the work without investigation. Researchers studying bioelectric development have faced funding cuts when their work suggests field-based organization rather than pure genetic control. Yet the anomalies in development that pure genetics cannot explain continue to accumulate in the scientific literature. Field-based explanations continue to emerge from researchers in countries outside the Western academic establishment, suggesting the suppression has geographic limits and may be weakening in other countries. the consciousness energy extraction hypothesis. Some suppressed researchers theorize that human consciousness generates a measurable energy field that can be detected through specialized instrumentation and potentially harvested for practical applications that could revolutionize technology. This implied that consciousness wasn't merely an epiphenomenon of neural activity, but a genuine force in the universe with measurable properties and characteristics. If consciousness generated energy, if human intention could be converted to usable power through proper technology, the implications for energy independence and human potential were staggering and revolutionary beyond measure. This research faced complete suppression at funding agencies worldwide. Facilities studying consciousness power fields were defunded abruptly without explanation. Researchers were professionally isolated through peer review rejection and equipment seizure. The threat wasn't primarily scientific, but existential and political, suggesting that human minds possessed capabilities that shouldn't exist according to materialist physics and its core assumptions about consciousness being epiphenomenal. Any evidence that consciousness generates measurable energy that could be harnessed or directed was systematically eliminated from publication in mainstream scientific venues. Journals that received papers on consciousness energy were pressured by funding agencies. Yet anomalous energy readings continue to be recorded in meditation research worldwide. In intention experiments, documented but unpublishable, researchers terrified of speaking publicly about findings that suggest consciousness is far more powerful than materialism officially permits or acknowledges. The structured water physics. Some researchers documented carefully that water subjected to electromagnetic vortex treatment could develop unusual and measurable properties, improve plant growth rates across all species tested, enhance biological effects in organisms. These findings suggested that water could be reorganized through specific physical manipulation into structural states that conventional physics didn't fully explain or understand. The vortex water effect worked consistently in independent studies conducted by different teams, but publishing became virtually impossible for mainstream scientific venues and journals. Research funding mysteriously dried up from government sources. Speaking invitations to present at conferences were canceled without explanation. The threat was fundamental and existential, that if water could be reorganized through simple physical vortex means into states with enhanced biological activity, it implied hidden capabilities in water's molecular structure that chemistry and biology textbooks deliberately omitted. This research had profound implications for agriculture, medicine, environmental remediation, and clean energy that weren't acceptable to corporate authorities invested in conventional approaches and existing power structures. The suppression remains absolute despite consistent replication of the effects by researchers working in isolation worldwide, documenting findings they cannot safely publish or discuss publicly without facing career destruction and professional isolation. Conclusion: these suppressed theories share a common characteristic that distinctly distinguishes them from normal scientific controversy and disagreement. They suggest that reality possesses hidden properties, that conventional science has systematically omitted crucial mechanisms, and that biological and physical systems operate according to principles far more sophisticated than materialism acknowledges or permits researchers to explore. From morphic resonance to consciousness energy, from biological transmutation to water memory, from tachyon physics to element conversion, each theory challenges the fundamental assumption that has dominated 20th century science. The assumption that matter is the primary reality and consciousness is merely an incidental byproduct of complex chemistry, and neural computation. The pattern of suppression is too consistent across decades and continents to be coincidental or the result of normal scientific skepticism. Each theory faced the same coordinated dismissal mechanisms, the same abrupt funding withdrawal, the same publishing blockade at journals and scientific conferences worldwide. Researchers who pursued these investigations faced professional destruction, not because their work was demonstrably invalid or lacked evidence, but because it suggested capabilities and properties that authorities prefer to keep hidden from public knowledge and scientific investigation. If morphic fields genuinely organize biological development across time, then life possesses organizing principles that genetics alone cannot explain, requiring complex to rewriting of evolutionary biology. If consciousness generates measurable energy fields, then human minds are forces in the universe in ways that fundamentally alter our understanding of existence itself and human potential. If organisms can transmute elements, or if water can carry biological memory, then the periodic table and chemistry itself require major revision and expansion of fundamental assumptions. The suppression serves a clear purpose that becomes obvious once recognized and examined carefully. It maintains the illusion that science has discovered the fundamental nature of reality, that materialism provides a complete framework for understanding existence comprehensively. Any theory suggesting that consciousness plays an organizing role in physical systems, that biology sees hidden capabilities, that matter responds to intention and information, threatens this comfortable materialist illusion that has dominated academia for decades. The scientific establishment protects itself by eliminating challenges before they gain traction in the broader community and capture public imagination. Theories are rejected before investigation even begins. Researchers are professionally isolated before their findings gain public visibility. Funding is withdrawn before results can be replicated widely by independent groups outside the control system. The system maintains consistency by preventing the emergence of evidence that would fundamentally shatter materialism entirely. Yet the anomalies persist with remarkable consistency across all continents and independent research. Teams. Independent researchers worldwide document findings that directly contradict everything they were taught in universities and that threaten established scientific orthodoxy. Water responds to intention and consciousness in ways that chemistry and physics cannot explain or dismiss satisfactorily. Organisms exchange information through invisible networks and fields that shouldn't exist according to current materialist theory. Consciousness correlates with measurable energy and electromagnetic field effects in experiments that should be impossible according to established physics. The evidence accumulates steadily in isolated laboratories and private journals worldwide, too dangerous for mainstream publication, too consistent to ignore or explain away through conventional mechanisms and standard physics. These suppressed theories represent the frontier of science that were deliberately discouraged and prevented from exploring at institutional levels by funding mechanisms. They suggest that human potential extends far beyond what we're officially told in textbooks and universities, that consciousness isn't incidental but central to the fabric of physical reality itself, that biology possesses hidden capabilities waiting to be rediscovered and developed through research, that nature operates according to principles far more sophisticated and interconnected than reductionist materialism permits or acknowledges in official channels. The greatest tragedy isn't that these theories were suppressed initially and briefly, it's that they were suppressed so effectively and completely that they've been forgotten by most contemporary scientists entirely. Entire research directions were eliminated before they began in earnest. The questions these theories raise remain deliberately unasked in mainstream science, the evidence remains undiscussed in academic circles, and the implications remain unexplored in universities worldwide. The suppression means that the deepest understanding of reality remains deliberately hidden from scientific investigation and public knowledge. The theories that could transform our understanding of consciousness, biology, and the nature of existence itself are prohibited from institutional research at all levels. The system persists not because the suppressed theories are demonstrably wrong, but because they might be right, and their correctness would destroy the authority structures that control what we're permitted to officially know and study. These 10 theories represent just the surface of suppressed science that accumulates in classified files worldwide. Beneath them lie countless others, researchers working in complete isolation, documenting findings they cannot publish in any journal, investigating questions that funding agencies consistently refuse to support or acknowledge. The pattern suggests systematic suppression of any research threatening the materialist framework that dominates contemporary science and controls the academic establishment worldwide. Until the scientific establishment, permits investigation of these questions without penalty, until researchers can pursue these theories without fear of professional destruction and career annihilation, The deepest questions about reality will remain deliberately unanswered by mainstream institutions. The suppressed theories prove that science isn't the objective pursuit of truth we believe it to be in popular imagination. It's a carefully maintained system that protects particular assumptions about reality, while eliminating challenges to those assumptions with coordinated efficiency. The greatest discoveries may be waiting in the research we've been forbidden to pursue, hidden in suppressed theories and isolated laboratories across the world.